Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. I see that people look a little bit more relaxed than this morning. All these jackets are coming off. That's great. That's also part of disruption. You've been working very hard this morning, at the end of the morning at least, and I'm very privileged to have here the four moderators of the panels of the various sessions this morning, and they will report back on what has been discussed this morning. There won't be a Q&A after that because we presume that what they will say is the truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. Who are my chairmen? To start with, the Chinese volunteer who stepped in at the last minute, Geke Feiter, Head of Retail P&C of Nationale Nederlanden, Torbjörn Magnussen, Vice President Insurance Europe and President CEO of If P&C Insurance in Sweden. Legan Pusi, President and CEO of the American Insurance Association. Welcome again to Europe. And Dickie Whittaker, CEO, Oasis Loss Modeling Framework from the UK. So, ladies and gentlemen, Torbjörn has kindly accepted to be the first to deliver briefly what was discussed this morning. Torbjörn.
Well, we discussed the implications of connected and automated autonomous cars and had the views of manufacturers, of the drivers, and of the insurers. And let's start with what we agreed on. We agreed on that this is arguably as big a revolution as the smartphone coming our way. It's not only a revolution of what the cars look like, how they are behaving, their technology, but also actually what we do when we are transported, how we park, where the car is, etc., etc. So it's a revolution of very big importance. Now, the first topic that came up is a very current one, because what people understand is that this is a big revolution, but what people do not necessarily always understand is that the question of connectivity is here now. And the discussion is going on in the car industry, in the insurance industry, and we basically agreed on a message that the politicians need to get their act together and move this forward. And of course, you can discuss this from several angles, but one way to focus your mind is just to think about what happens in a car after a car crash with an automatic message about what happened. To whom? To the car dealer, or to a garage, or to the OEM, or to the hospital, or actually to the police with complete information about what you've done, or to your state register about your personal data. This is, of course, a moot point at the moment and an important way to just visualize this issue. The second topic was a bit more visionary, and that's the fact that the number of fatalities on our roads has been coming down over decades now in the Western world. And we were talking about whether it would be possible to bring it down even further, agreed that if we didn't make that happen, especially the OEMs, we are actually doing something wrong. So we expect the fatalities on the roads, the number of injuries, to continue to come down. Autonomous cars is just one part of that process, and autonomous cars in any definition will not be on the roads in any large scale before 2025 was the general date that we set for that. There are some obvious insurance issues that everybody's heard about, that who's liable for a crash car caused by an autonomous car. Is it the programmer, is it the producer, is it the passenger? But there are some new things that maybe not everyone has discussed yet in our industry, and that's, of course, the cyber risk. Now, when we see terrorism in many countries, if you're able to take over a big car, who's liable for that, and how do you prevent it? Secondly, of course, you can have a rather innocent programming error, coding error in from one of the manufacturers, and you can have an accumulation of motor losses. That's basically never happened before. You can have a car crash involving maybe 10, 20 vehicles, but all of the vehicles from one car brand maybe in one country or even Europe. So that's a new issue for our industry to think about. So fascinating times for the car industry, for the insurance industry, and for all of us when we look ahead towards how we are mobile in the future.
Very good, very interesting. And has there also been a discussion about the use of motor cars? Because it's expected that the number of cars will go down in the future. And so the roads will become safer anyway because there will be less cars.
Yeah, there was a few comments around that even surprised me a bit, because on the one hand, the usage of cars should be more efficient and we should need fewer of them. But of course, on the other hand, rumor has it that we spend more time finding parking in big cities than actually using the cars for transportation. And if parking is no longer a problem because the car goes away and parks itself outside with the car, we can have more cars rather than fewer. So I think the jury's out on that one.
Okay, very good. Heike, you were talking about innovation, so we are dying to understand what innovative ideas were developed in your panel.
And don't die, that's bad for life insurance, no?
Yeah, good.
New technologies, the impact on consumers. That was our angle of these sessions, beautifully led by Cecile Wendling, which unfortunately she couldn't make it at this point. With Martin Merlin, DG, European Commission, and Ursula Pagel from BUC. Good perspective on this. And we started on technical changes impacting the customer. What's happening right now? And I was able to tell a bit on what we're currently doing for our customers, how technology is driving into our propositions, becoming a part of it, what customers do expect from a digital, have your financial solutions in your fingertips, in your mobile phone, and how we shift to that. And Martin, of course, told us about his fintech consultation. And to the complete audience, I think you still can react on that till 16th of June, so please do. And we shifted then to data ethics, because this is one of the topics we have to address. Ethics of algorithms, how to deal with it. And Ursula made a fair point about all the risks that might occur in this field, thinking of profiling, exclusion, fairness, transparency on use of data. And we had a good discussion on it. Well, that the industry should act as a responsible owner for that. And of course there's legislation now, and we're working on impacting GDPR and see how to deliver on that level. What's more, of course we talked about the further future as well. From a regulatory perspective, of course there's the beautiful concept of sandbox, because you need some area to breathe, also from a regulatory perspective. What more on that one? And of course, our view that communication with our customers will be the starting point instead of insurance products. I think we have to turn it the other way around. Start with the interaction with your customers and then think, what kind of products or product suite do you need to fit into these WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger kind of correlation with your customers. And I think Cecile put it all together in 3 E's at the end. Empower, from a industry perspective, have your financial solutions in your fingertips. Explain, the consumer organization perspective, please explain. And experiment, from a regulatory perspective. And I think that's what ties us together when it comes to our responsibility in joint effort to deliver new products to our market with new technologies and more demanding customers than ever.
Were the consumers scared about some of the messages that you were telling?
We had some different views.
For instance, when algorithms break down, what are you going to do about it?
To my view, you can't control all the algorithms in the world.
Okay.
I don't think it's feasible. So we rather, I think that's where we we hit the ground together is that you have to organize to step out for your customer to a human interface. Don't rely only on algorithms. Please, insurance industry, put in a button, please get me to a human somewhere, and take over contact.
Okay, that's very good to remember that the robots won't take over the world yet, so we still need
Not
to be in
totally.
power. Very good. Let's then move on to natural catastrophes. Dickie, what enlightening ideas were brought up on that disastrous topic?
Thank you, Carol. Well, I think the first point that was made was that actually if we're going to move forward, we're going to have much more common understanding of risk and availability of data. So this would mean that developing countries as well as developed countries, the customer base would have access to all that information. And on top of that, that needs to apply to different sort of stakeholders that today may not have access to that information. So that would start with cities, for example, as well as individuals as well. And if we have that sort of position where the knowledge of risk is spread far and wide with some commonality to where that comes from, then presumably we're going to be in a much better position to actually sell products into our customer bases. You don't want to sell to an ignorant client. So if your client has the same information as you do, you've got a better chance of selling a product. Something we talked about a little bit, but not too much, was do we need a whole new range of products to be able to deal with this sort of new environment we're moving into? And there was certainly a suggestion that some of the problems we're facing are not so sudden and event-based as the ones that we're used to dealing with traditional types of catastrophe, Cat XL type of covers, which are prevalent. A little bit of a conversation about whether parametric would make some sort of alternative sense. There's certainly a lot of interest from some developing nations to try and pull together their needs using parametric insurance, although I think at least a couple of us have the view that that's not new, and that there's some problems with that will occur at some point, and we're seeing a little bit of that right now. So if we start with this position of we need a sort of democratization of data and information and therefore risk knowledge, coming with that comes a need to have greater transparency. And certainly at the moment, I think that can be quite difficult for a number of different reasons, and it's partly to do with perhaps, in fact, our desire as an industry to really understand what that means. I think we've seen reactions from the industry sometimes when they're presented with the uncertainty that's inherent with trying to understand natural catastrophes. The reaction can be, I don't want to know. Too much uncertainty is hard to deal with for humans in many cases. Going with all of these things perhaps comes choice. So if we have a greater choice of opinion, actually that usually brings with it some appreciation of uncertainty, because actually if you have one view of risk from an external provider, ignoring the individual companies' needs, of course, to have their own view of risk, but if that's derived from only one or two sources, that maybe not going to give enough diversity. And we spend a fair bit of time talking about climate change and how we could possibly be able to deal with that. Especially, I think, somewhere around now, the President of the United States may be making some announcement about whether or not the US are going to be backing the Paris Agreement or not. We're going to be faced with some challenges around the world, and the insurance industry is going to, of course, need to play its role in that, and how we deal with that is going to be, I think, quite challenging, as did the group. And one of the sources of information that I think there was a view that we need to lean on a little bit more is the science base around the world that has a lot of information. And the point was made that actually their ability to translate a written peer-reviewed paper into something that has utility and value in the operations of insurance or reinsurance company is quite problematic, and there are some challenges there. But there are some structures out there and some initiatives out there, including the company that I own, I run, that actually is looking in that sort of space. And then I think the last point about all of this is we face some considerable challenges in dealing with a multitude of these problems, of which the protection gap is one, climate change is another, uncertainty is a third, getting this information out there is a fourth, and collaboration is increasingly playing a role, both within the insurance and reinsurance community, but also between it and other stakeholders like governments, like some of the development banks, like the science base. And if we're going to move forward as far as we probably need to, we're going to have to do more in that area to be successful.
Yeah. Very interesting, your idea about transparency and so on. But even if people know they are at risk, they're living on a volcano, are they still going to buy insurance?
Well, I think the experience in California would tell you no, because the Californians buy roughly 10% homeowners policies when it's quite clear there is some significant earthquake risk. So I think there's a lot of work, and psychology needs to play a role here. How we communicate about risk. I think there's lots of work that we need to do that's far outside of our business to be able to solve that problem.
Very good, very good. Leanne, as you hear, is a lot of data floating around in this age of technological change. What about the cyber risk?
Yes, so our panel looked at the challenges in cyber risk, and it really dovetails with some of the themes here, which obviously in a world of autonomous vehicles, the personal data, there's also the hacking risks that you might have on all these connected vehicles. Your point about knowledge of the risk certainly continues to come through on any conversation about cyber risk. It's evolving, and we're always going to have to kind of keep up with and learn more about this risk. And then in the world of innovation using digitalization and all of that, that's really the future of the cyber risk challenges and what we're trying to wrestle with today, but also with tomorrow in terms of protecting data. So there's some good news. So we talked about an increase in take-up rates across really all size organizations. This used to be a risk that was insured largely by the larger retailers and health insurers and others. But now we're seeing it in the SME community, which is encouraging. There is a greater awareness, better pricing, more options, overall more capacity, and the nature of the risk for cyber attacks continues to increase. Obviously, the WannaCry ransomware events of recent weeks underscores all of that. So, but insurers in their capacity not only is underwriting an insurance product to match the risk, but really what came out from our panelists too is they function much like consultants to these entities, trying to help them ask the right questions. Many aren't assessing their own risk in a way, knowing what products they need. So the broker plays an important role in that, but the insurer, we had 2 insurers on our panel talking about their role is as much a consultant as it is helping them then match the product to their risk once they help them go through that. But so that, I think from having followed this in recent years in the public policy side, that all sounded very encouraging, but some of the challenges remain, right? So we have a product, as I said, that's many of the panelists talked about the evolving nature of it, that the biggest driver of growth is still a headline. It's when we have a Target or a Sony or somebody else with a major attack that still tends to really be the best driver of awareness and the need to put in place your own protections as well as buy a risk management product that our industry is going to sell. And we ended on some of the concerns, mainly what we don't know about this risk. And again, big ransomware attacks that hit the entire globe and hundreds of thousands of computers really underscore the accumulation and aggregation concerns of cyber risk. The concern about regulation. We have a patchwork in the US. It's evolving with the GDPR in Europe, so these will all be drivers. But do we need standardization in some places? Is that something the regulation could help and actually be more of a partner with the industry? Also a conversation about some panelists felt like there might be an element of this risk that is uninsurable at its greatest numbers. And certainly I know Lloyd's and others have done studies with lots of with T's in the number, like trillions of, for certain size losses. So those well beyond the capacity of the industry and is their government role. I think the U.S. perspective, at least the companies that I represent, as well as the panelists today, most of them said we're not ready to have that discussion about government backstops, but I think it's out there, and several individuals, leaders in the industry, I think, do raise it, and you can't, again, look at the headlines without recognizing there'll be risks of that size. But overall, a marketplace where more people are getting aware of the risk and they're buying products and consulting with our industry to find solutions, and so I think it's a better story than it might have been a few years ago.
So basically, suppose that you were a regulator now, you see all these products coming up and all the risks that go along with that. Would you rather say, let's not have these products?
No, I think, in fact, these products to some extent have evolved. with regulators knowing about them. I think where we might need some help is standardization. I mean, again, trying to set some rules. If we have different breach notifications all over the place, then how do you best get a product that meets those needs across the board? So I think there were certain areas where I think the industry would welcome a partnership in trying to meet the need of the policyholder.
Yeah. Well, Torbjörn, if I think about your automated car that's driving out somewhere in Sweden, you know, beautiful scenery, and something is happening to the car, somebody's hacking the car, and you're not driving to where you want to go, but you're driving backwards instead of going ahead. You know, how can I protect myself? When I buy a car, should I also buy insurance for cyber risk?
I think you should, or in the end that you will, but I think it's very encouraging in that we're all now discussing loss prevention, claims handling, new products, the development of the world mirrored by the insurance industry rather than just new regulation as we have done for many years. So I think this is a great development.
Okay, very good. On the innovative part that you were discussing and the consumers that were slightly worried about things, how do you see the way forward? Do you believe that consumer organizations are going to be unhelpful in technological developments to move forward, or do you think that they can be convinced that maybe ultimately it's in their interest and the risks need to be properly taken care of through insurance?
Yeah, I think, or I feel we have to put things in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
At the one hand, our responsibility to act in an industry in a way that's sustainable, and at the other hand, thinking about a customer group. For instance, when I talk to the young board in our company, next gen guys, what they tell me is, I expect you to know everything I leave traces. I expect you to know, but please make your service relevant to me, because that's what matters most to me. Give me value. And somehow we have to balance these generation things, because there's not one consumer, no? There are multiple kind of types with other expectations. These consumer expectations and the protection and safety, we have to balance it somehow, because otherwise customers will also push us from a customer need perspective, from what's keeping you. Please give us some value. But we have to balance it in a sensible way.
I like that conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, because that is exactly a very good lead-in to our regulatory panel that will come on later this afternoon, because regulation is always about finding the right balance, you know. It is very difficult, I can tell you, as a former regulator. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in thanking the leaders of the panels this morning for their fantastic summary of the debate. Thank you very much.